Thank you so much, Brian, as he's zipping out, and Holly and Kathy. That hymn takes us through the entire plan of salvation. It gives us the justification, the sanctification, the glorification, ending with a prayer to the Lord, but starting anchored in His Word. I mean, that hymn has talked to me so many times, again today. I'm going to see if we can sweet talk this thing into, well, we're still online. It's doing better than last week. Sorry for those who had to endure last week's situation, but thankfulness to, oops, there we go. Go tell. Actually, if you want to see a phenomenal organist, you can look up Go Tell It on the Mountain, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, and their organist, when he plays this, I just can't imagine any human playing an instrument like he plays that instrument. But today, there's only the short version online. It's like 6 minutes or something like that, and it looks like I'm going to have to do. But have you ever done something that made life difficult for another person? Sometimes it's not intentional, you know? Like in Goodlettsville, Tennessee, here on what was a Wednesday, and I was a little bit jittery still from, among other things, having someone cut me off on the highway, and he had, as the police like to say, the one with the most lug nuts wins. And he was an 18-wheeler. When he cut me off, I got the brakes real fast. So we finally all calmed down a bit, and then I was the guy that cut somebody off by mistake in Goodlettsville, and as I got into the left turn lane, and the person who was gliding in beside me, that thankfully found her brakes in time, she communicated her displeasure. That horn seemed like it would never stop beeping. It just went on and on and on until the light turned green. So I got somebody upset. Have I ever done something that made life difficult? Yes, not so long ago. But there are other times. In my mom and dad's experience, yeah, we won't go there. Anyway, those of you who are parents can think the other direction about your own children and stuff that can make life difficult. If you come with me, we're going to spend our time, I'll talk about Matthew here and there, but we're going to be in Mark chapter 5. And if the internet dies, we're in Mark chapter 5, so you're still good. But I want to highlight a few things, and this passage, I want to take you in a place that may be a little unfamiliar to you, or maybe you've seen it all along. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes or Gerasenes, according to which manuscripts you're reading. When he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. Imagine if you were Peter, James, Andrew, one of those people. You just got done with the most terrifying night you can remember on the lake. There's that storm, and Jesus is sleeping in the boat. They have to wake him up. Don't you care that we're perishing? You know. And he did care. There was a bit of a lesson in it for them, but you go from one terror to another. And here they are with, Matthew tells us one more detail. Remember what Matthew adds to this story? Hey, Matthew's the tax collector. He's a numbers guy, so hint, hint, it's a number. He remembers there were two. When he tells this story, Matthew chapter 8, starting in verse 28, he notices there are two. Mark focuses on the most terrifying guy, apparently. So here came out this man with an unclean spirit. I have not encountered that in my life. Have any people here encountered a demon-possessed person? I mean, that you have. So that is memorable in ways you don't like to think about, I'm sure. And this one had his dwelling among the tombs. I mean, that by itself, a normal person sleeping in the tombs, that's still disturbing. I mean, if you were walking down the road and you passed a cemetery, and then you saw some guy sleeping behind your uncle's gravestone, I mean, it just gives you a strange feeling. No one could bind him, not even with chains. Uh-oh, this is going to glitch. Let me stop the share. Okay. Now maybe we can rescue it again after this one's admitted. It's one of these weird glitchy things with this computer, at least. When somebody joins, we have it bump out the ability to advance slides. Let's try again. And there, and there. Are we on? There we are. Sort of, kind of. That kind of power, for me, is unimaginable. I mean, when you see a man take an iron bar and bend it, you might be, like I am, thinking, wow. Or there's the sport I didn't know existed, and I bumped into it the other day, where in the Netherlands, how do you cross when you have these little canals everywhere, and you don't want to have to carry your own ladder? You're smiling. You know what they do, apparently. They take a pole, and they kind of do like a pole vaulter kind of guy, just bloop, and use the pole hitting the, to jump over. But they've made it into a sport where you have a pole like 15 or 20 feet long, and they run, and the canal is wider than the pole, so they have to let the pole, actually the pole is in the canal. So they run, and they leap and grab this thing, and they climb to the top as fast as they can, so that when it bends, they land on land. Or if you don't win this competition, you land somewhere else with a splash. But when you see that, when I see that, and I see people climbing in like 4 seconds, climbing to the top of a pole just with hands and feet, I think, wow, they're strong. But imagine a man breaking chains, and you just would be terrified. What do you do with this guy? He had often been bound with chains, and the chains had been pulled apart by him, the shackles broken in pieces. I'm jumping ahead. Always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself. I remember one year in college, my 3rd year in college. I slept through it, so I didn't have that experience. But I had people come back and say, I was out, and I heard this sound like a woman screaming. And immediately, one of the woodsy guys said, out here in California, that would be a mountain lion. But later that day, we found out it was a woman screaming on our campus. And when you hear these kinds of things, like a scream in the dark, it just puts a chill down your spine. What's happening? Even when it isn't a person. We lived for a while in a house that was a modular home that had seen better days, and somehow the end of the house we were on was better, but the room where our son was sleeping, underneath the floor, he'd hear the animal scream when another animal killed them. Just that sound is terrifying. But this man, when he saw Jesus afar, he saw him from afar, he ran and worshipped him. So far, I mean, the story is not so terrifying, except that while he is physically trying to worship Jesus, bowing there, he cried out with a loud voice and said, what have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God that you do not torment me. There are times in life when you cannot even say what you need to say. This man apparently wanted to ask Jesus, please free me from this demon. But Jesus couldn't hear those words from him. He heard the words from the one controlling this man. What do I have to do with you? Don't torment me. For he had said to him, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. If you were in that man's, well, he may not have even had shoes on, if you were in his situation, because at this point he's just running around naked, he's tearing off chains, tearing everything, and it describes him as being cut. And when Jesus said, come out, now there's a voice talking. And there'd be that desperate sense, I want to accept you, but the voice coming out of my mouth is not my voice. Saying what? Anyway, Jesus asked, what is your name? I want to pause. Jesus is our example, and he's our substitute. I want to be very careful, and my personal concept here is this is not Jesus, my example. We are not to talk to demons. Jesus talked to demons here. He controlled them. He could tell them what to do. But Jesus died on the cross for me. That was not my example. I cannot die for you. You cannot die for me for my eternal salvation. So as I read the gospel accounts, I step back and try to understand, is he showing me what I'm supposed to do, or is he doing for me what I cannot do? And there's a little evidence here. This man, you have evidence. He just said what he did not want to say. So Jesus is doing what this man could not do. He's rebuking the demons and telling them, get out. So like this man probably did in his head, I can cry out to the Lord even when I don't utter a word. Lord, even my mouth is not doing what it's supposed to do right now. Please help me. But out of his mouth came the term, my name is Legion, for we are many. And at that point, the disciples have run away. I'd be inclined to run away too, you know. Even the house my mom and dad bought in Northwest Arkansas, the people who lived there before, their daughters, Stacy and Corinda, came to class where I was in school in South Bend, Indiana, and they were telling stories of that house on the property. They told of going to bed one night and then looking, and there's this being that entered the room with them. And he looked terrifying, and then as he glanced at the nightstand between their beds, he saw a Sabbath School quarterly, and he grimaced and vanished. The next thing they did is contact the pastor and the elders and say, we have something to confess and to request. We went with friends and dabbled with a Ouija board, and it seems that gave permission to the enemy to come into the home, you know. And we don't want him in the home. We are not going that way anymore. The elders and the pastor of the congregation came to their home and prayed. They were not Jesus, so they did not command the demons to leave. They prayed for the Lord to take those demons and command them to leave, and they did. So by the time we got there, the house did not have demons in it. That was thankful for us. But the demons claimed the authority. He begged him earnestly that he'd send them out of the country. Anyway, a large herd of swine was there. Have you ever been around a herd of swine? Yes. Even if you go to Camp Akita and they take you on a hayride, they used to drive us out on a loop of a few miles. If you do the loop, there's a big pig farm there. And when the wind goes the wrong way, even though I'm not a polar bear, I can smell a mile and a half away. And, yeah, it ain't happy. Okay. So 2,000 of these guys were out there munching, and the demons begged, saying, you know, send us to the swine. Why would a demon want to go into something tangible? There's no need. Even when the devil is about, or his workers are about to be pushed away, he wants to do as much damage as he can on the way out. Even when we're playing. I remember the day I was canoeing down the river with believe it or not, a group of pastors at Camp Asabel in Michigan. And we're all racing down the river, and some guy ahead jumped out of his canoe, and he was waiting for people, you know, throwing them in the river. Okay, I'm going to throw you in the river. He's like 6'2" or something, and I'm 5'8". He's pretty strong. I just told him I don't go down alone. Of course, I went down, but I didn't go down alone. But the devil does that not just for play. He does it because if I can't get you, I'm going to hurt someone somehow, or I'm going to make it so they want you gone. I believe Jesus could read the future, and he knew the consequences of this next act. But he read the future beyond what the demons did. That's encouraging to me. Well, Mark lets us know that piece. Only Mark. Anyway, at once, Jesus gave them permission. The unclean spirits went out. They entered the swine, about 2,000. They ran violently down until they choked. I don't know. Have you ever run so fast you couldn't stop? And especially when there's an incline. I've had that more as a child. You run, and next thing you know, you're rolling down the hill. And it's scary when you feel like, I can't stop. And I wonder if my legs can keep up. And they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed. And he's sitting there clothed in his right mind. How would you feel if your most terrifying person in your life, you can see now he will no longer be terrifying? But also it means you just lost your entire investment. 2,000 pigs. I don't know how much one pig costs, but 2,000 pigs in any day in history, that's money. And when they had to choose, I'll choose the man who can totally transform a damaged life, or I choose wealth. We see what they did. They were afraid, and they heard all the story. The people keeping those pigs, they were saying, oh, that happened like this, whatever. And then they began to plead with him, please stay here. We want to hear more of what you know. It's very much unlike the town where the woman at the well was, Sychar, former Shechem. It's the opposite. It's like, please leave. You're not welcome here. They were pleading with him. Can you imagine pleading with the Lord, go away? But we do that sometimes. It's like when there's a choice. He wants me to do this, I want to do that, and I know if I'm going the other way, I'm saying, I choose a different way. I don't choose your way. We've been there before with our looking at Judas versus Barabbas, and we find ourselves with that choice. I can't imagine asking Jesus to leave, but they did. When he got into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might go with him, or might be with him. I would say the same. My whole life has been trashed. It probably started with bad choices, but here's where the first time I read this, and even now, as I think about being in his shoes, this part is disturbing to me. Jesus did not permit him. Can you imagine? Your whole life is pagan. This is the east side of Galilee. Remember where it said it was? Decapolis. I've been to a piece of Decapolis before where we saw the city of Jericho, which is one of those 10, Decapolis, 10 cities. And we saw some of the archaeological excavations, all that stuff. But in this 10-city region, they did not worship Israel's God. And yet, this man who was being sent back to paganism, all he knew is he met Jesus for that little bit on one day. And Jesus didn't say, come, I'm going to train you. He said, just go and tell what God did for you. God started him with the little bit he knew. Do you know the rest of that story? Well, I'll share one piece that everybody knows, of course. He departed and began to proclaim it in Decapolis, to proclaim all that Jesus had done for him. And what happened? All marveled. And that was so encouraging to me. And that's where the story ended. No, it didn't. Have you read the rest of the story in Mark? Matthew doesn't tell the rest of the story. He tells most of the rest of the story, but leaves out one detail that just changes everything. You remember when Jesus went all the way up into Syrophoenicia to talk to that lady whose child was demon-possessed. And without seeing the child, he cast that demon out too. That's outside Israel. And then he came back down from there, and in Mark chapter 7, verse 31, where did he come when he came back from that casting out of demons? Anybody know? Where did he come when he came back from that casting out of demons? And he meets this man that's deaf. Mark tells about him, spitting, touching the guy's tongue, healing him. Again, here it is, verse 31. Departing from the region of Tyre and Sidon, he came through the midst of the region of Decapolis. He came back. You don't know that from Matthew. But Mark and Matthew tell about this particular thing, but only Mark tells us Jesus came back where he told that man, go and tell your friends, tell what God has done for you. Now Matthew and Mark tell what happens next. Do you remember what that is? Yes. Here comes the multitude, very great. When they finally count them, there are 4,000 men plus women and children. And they had 3 days there with him. Now we know earlier Jesus had fed 5,000 men in kind of the north edge of Galilee where the Jewish people were, and they waited 1 day and he fed this crowd. But here they are 3 days. He's saying, they've come from afar. I can't just send them away. And his disciples said, how can we satisfy these people with bread here in the wilderness? What? They're talking to the man they watched multiply 5 little flatbread things and 2 fish and feed 5,000 men plus women and children. And they're standing here saying, how are we supposed to feed all these Gentiles? In their minds, there are people God loves, and then there's everybody else. Jesus intentionally has stepped outside their comfort zone. He's just talked to this group for 3 days. Now, back when he talked to the Israelites, he put all this Israel imagery out there, like the manna that was multiplied, and there are 12 baskets left over, and, that's the number of completion. The new Israel, he's like the new Moses. We're at the foot of this hill, like Mount Sinai, so to speak. But not here. Here it's 7 baskets left over. 7 loaves of, not loaves, but like flatbread that he starts with, symbols they would recognize in a pagan place. God speaks to us according to our time, place, culture, and language, and the message was consistent. I'm here for you. I recognize your needs. I deal with the things that are wrong in your life. But I go back and I think about those people. One day they said, Jesus, please leave my town. He's threatening to them. Another day, they want him to stay for 3 days, and they go hungry listening to him. And the only difference between chapter 8 and chapter 5 is one guy that spent a little time in Jesus' presence. He didn't even know what Jesus believed fully, not yet. After 3 days of listening, I imagine he came back and he did. But 4,000 men, I think they included the people who said, go away. He was the cause of the loss of some income, the cause of frustration and anger, and at the same time, the cause of people coming to know Jesus. You may feel like my life has taken a turn that frustrates me, that concerns me, that has damaged people I care about. But that's only part one. You may be like this man where Jesus says, go tell. Tell what God has done for you. And it may not be a complicated story. It may be a simple sharing of your faith. I'm going to skip down past all of these to the discipleship challenge. What is one thing that Jesus did for you which you can share with someone this week? That man could share basically one thing. I once was demon-possessed, and now I'm in my right mind. Praise God. And they would think, if he can do that for you, what could he do for me? We can share our simple testimony. I used to be dealing with this, and now it has turned in this particular way. The next piece, a piece of pie, is a sort of tagged on piece at the end of a sermon, and it's a piece that I don't like to bring, but I bring this morning. My mother, we are 3 of us. My brother and I and my sister have parents, or had parents that we appreciated. Of course, our father died a 1.5 years ago, but Mom has needed more care. Eventually, she's having issues with her heart. And so my brother has been bearing that burden. As you know, she would come and stay with us for 5-6 weeks at a time, and we love having her here. You got to meet her bit by bit. Thankfully, what's happening with her is not like a sudden plunge in her health. It's one of these slow skids, and it's getting to be more than my brother can handle alone. So we went and we've talked, and we've tried to think, what next steps can we take? It took a very strange turn in March this year. Their pastor left. My mother put my name in the hat and said, could you consider him? 2 weeks ago, their ministerial director contacted us. Last week, their president came here, and this week we interviewed there. And they ended up at the end voting unanimously to ask us to come to that district. We believe the Lord's hand is in it. This is, I'm sorry, the only picture I have of all 5 of us. I'm sorry, it's just, one of these casual out at the Pacific Ocean things where the 2 guys took me out to try to boogie board, which they did well, and I survived. Frozen, shaking, the camera stops the shaking in motion, because the Pacific Ocean's cold. If you ever try it, you'll know. But yeah, we're scattered over the map, but we realize, my mom immediately said, please, even though she put my name in, she says, I don't want you to come here because of me. And I said, Mom, why not? You've been there for us. There are times in life your decisions change because of changing needs. And it's that time in our life. We really appreciate our connections in Bloomington, used to be Normal, and Springfield and Decatur. We are going to deeply miss our times and are making new memories with you. It's probably somewhere around the end of July, early August. Anyway, by August 1, we'll be connected on the other side. The conference offers support. They will help to cover the pulpit from time to time. I know it's also, we've got the double burden because we're losing two more of our speakers with Phil and Teresa at the similar time. And we are blessed that we have Dr. Majeye, who's come here, thankfully, before that. But for the piece of my family, well, actually, Phil and Teresa are in a related thing in a different way because of some specific health needs that require some kind of stricter intervention. So this last few weeks has had our hearts in turmoil and our minds confused and our nights not fully rested, but in the end, we've taken that call. Thank you so much for letting us be part of the journey beside you. You have been, I have to be careful, this is on the internet. It's being recorded, so I will say it differently. You have been a kind of place of refuge during times that we had stuff. It stops there. Thank you again. We have a closing hymn. I've got to stop. I can't talk. But our closing hymn.